Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Our power in the present tottering condition of all forms of power will be more invincible than any other, because it will remain invisible until the moment when it has gained such strength that no cunning can any longer undermine it. Out of the temporary evil we are now compelled to commit will emerge the good of an unshakable rule, which will restore the regular course of the machinery of the national life, brought to naught by liberalism. The result justifies the means. Let us, however, in our plans, direct our attention not so much to what is good and moral as to what is necessary and useful. Before us is a plan in which is laid down strategically the line from which we cannot deviate without running the risk of seeing the labor of many centuries brought to naught. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio, and I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm honored to have a special guest with me, Gary Wayne. Gary, are you there, brother?
I am, and so happy to be back with you again tonight, and very much looking forward to the show.
Likewise, brother, and I really appreciate you and your willingness to come on with me. I know that the listening audience always appreciates our collaboration as well, and I know that you're very busy doing all of which you do. So can you talk a little bit about that, your previous book and your latest efforts, and where people can go to follow your work?
Sure. So the book that I wrote that I'm known for is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. And it's probably, without patting myself too much on the shoulder here, it's probably the most in-depth, detailed book on secret societies and Nephilim and prophecy that's sort of all woven together in a 6,000-year transgenerational conspiracy that we're all part of, and will probably be part of the end time as well. And so you can get a hold of me if people are looking to follow me on Twitter at GaryWayne63 or on Facebook under Gary Wayne. I also have a Gary Wayne, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy group. And I post regularly on a couple of Genesis 6 Conspiracy pages, my timeline, and also in the group. So if you're looking to know what I'm working on or what new information I'm putting out, go there. If you want to get a hold of me through email, you can get a hold of me through my website. There's a contact there. And on the website is a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters, so you can get a good feel for the book. And you can also connect over to Barnes & Noble or Amazon and or to Kindle if you would like to purchase a book there, or you can get a signed copy of the book there as well. And so I am supposedly and allegedly working on a new book. I wish I was at this point, but I need to get back to it. So I want to get that book out by the end of this year, and it'll be more of a prophetic book and focusing heavily on the lost tribes of Israel in the second Exodus.
Most excellent. And I know that people are looking forward to gaining access to and being able to dedicate some time and following up your previous work. And I know a lot of people have been greatly blessed as well by your first book, and it covers a a great detail the larger plan of the New World Order, how the conspiracy ties into the biblical narrative and also the prophetic end, which the Most High is leading us all into. And so, yeah, looking forward to that. Also, just for the listening audience, Gary has agreed to join us as far as Sacred Word Publishing to do some Ask Me Anything shows. And so I know those of you that follow what we do every other Friday night, that we will be in that same kind of format. And so please do, if you have questions you'd like to ask Gary, or if you'd like to have sort of, one-on-one communication, Gary will be responding to and answering those inquiries. And so you can contact Joy Garcia at sacredwordpublishing.com, and we'll be doing really soon these particular AMA shows. And so looking forward to that, Gary. I know a lot of people appreciate you doing that kind of.
Yeah, I love to take questions. And anybody who is familiar with me on social media knows that, if somebody gets a hold of me with a question, I will get back to them as to what my thoughts on that are. So looking forward to doing that, because I think, the whole idea is to get information out there and to have people hopefully continue in terms of what we're trying to find out and what we're trying to reveal, and hopefully clarify some of the things that they maybe perhaps haven't had the time to do some research on or just can't quite figure out.
Right. And then there are a lot of other people doing similar research in the line of what we do, and that they may have, particular question on a certain aspect of a certain subject. So it's also, both general and advanced inquiries that people are asking. And those are some of the most fun shows.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You never know, where one rabbit hole will lead and what kind of subjects will come up. So,
well, and I'm always amazed at times at how good the questions are and how well thought they are. And so, yeah, you need to be on your toes, but they are stimulating to have, because it keeps everybody sharp, I think.
Right. And also, if you would, Gary, on the questions that you have coming in, please do save those so that we can, in this format, share them with a broader audience. And so I think people will be greatly benefited from that. But this evening, we're going to be covering the Jesuit connection to the New World Order and the overall larger plan of bringing forth the not only the New World Order and that particular agenda, but also the Antichrist, because that's really what's behind the covert and the ulterior motive of the New World Order plan. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think, is one of those key pieces to what we see visibly for us today in terms of how the end time is coming about and how the New World Order is kind of working together. The foggy part about the Jesuits is that there are 1,000 or probably more different sort of theories as to where they fit in the whole organizational structure. Are they the leader? Are they halfway up? How do they actually fit in? And I think that if we want to really understand where the Jesuits fit in, we have to understand the sort of the hierarchy of secret societies and how the Jesuits were founded and how they were disbanded and then reestablished, and then how they got to where they are today. Because it's not this sort of straight line sort of story. And, the thing that I hear the most from people is that, the Jesuits are basically the ones who created Rosicrucians, and they're the ones who the Freemasons answer to, and they're this all-powerful organization. And I'm not going to diminish how powerful they are, but that's not quite how the whole hierarchy works. So understanding not only prehistory, but also our history, what's going on today and what's going to come about in the end time, you kind of need to understand that hierarchical structure of the secret societies and the organizational structure of how the bloodlines of the Nephilim, how they're connected with the secret societies, and how they're connected with the Gnostic religions who permeate the secret societies and were in joint partners to founding the Jesuits, and who their organizations were before the Jesuits came along within the church. So it's a very, very large subject. So it all depends on where you want to dive in on this, then, in terms of what you think we should be doing for clarification, or I begin with their creation and move forward.
Yeah, I think we should start with that, because that will then lead into, because there's so many facades, so many covers, so many fronts, and it can all get confusing. And so, yeah, let's start with the origin and then move down from there.
Yeah, it's very, very confusing, which is why,
they want it that way, though.
Of course they do.
Yes, absolutely.
Of course they do. They're putting out that information all of the time. So, the Jesuit order is a Gnostic order, that's created in 1540, as how most people understand their creation, starting with Ignatius of Loyola in about 1523 with a Mary apparition, where he's going to have several of these apparitions, and he's going to be drafted by the Mary of these apparitions, which is the same Mary apparitions that are like Fatima or Lourdes or Medjugorje, or the apparitions of Joan of Arc. And in his case, he's going to have his own one that he's going to, dedicate the Jesuit order to, but it's all the same sort of Mary apparitions. It's the same being, if we can put it that way. And they'll actually dedicate the Jesuit Society to Mary, and did so in their church in Rome called the Jesuit Church, and that's dedicated to Mary, but not necessarily Mary, Mother of Jesus. But the beginnings are sort of before that. And and also understand that 1540 is relatively late on in the organization of most of these of the secret societies that we know of today, that are still visible today, that most people will recognize, whether it's Illuminati or Rosicrucians or the Royal Society or Freemasons, or and then the later groups like Bohemian Grove or Bilderbergers and Club of Rome and all those other ones. So let's go back a little bit before the Jesuits, and understanding that they are an ascetic monastic order. This is an order that has its roots in Gnostic orders that are going to set up within the Catholic Church, like the Calabrian monks who worked with the Knights Templar, which again is a key part of the secret society historical and understanding and hierarchy. You have the Benedictine Knights and the Augustine Knights and Cistercians, with the Benedictines having members on the original, 2 members on the original founders of the Knights Templar. And even before that, even back to the Essenes, who are the first ones to bring over the monastic ascetic movement from the east to the west. And so these are all building on these sort of monastic orders. And they're molded within the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is persecuting the Gnostics and anybody of a different religious persuasion, right into extinction and or underground. And so they're going to mold into the Catholic Church, and they begin that with the Roman Collegia, which is the builders group or a Masons group that are going to build churches for the Christian Church, and then later on, they mix in with the Knights Templar. But it's just sort of an understanding of what kind of orders these are that are within the Catholic Church, and they're all monastic orders. They have the same sort of foundings, whether it's the Franciscans or whichever one that you want to look at. So I mentioned this sort of amalgamation with the Knights Templar, and the Knights Templar are the founders of the modern secret societies. And they're first founded with the aid of Calabrian monks and Saint Benedict, who is a Benedictine or a Cistercian, who's going to write the rule for the Templars and support their papal bull to establish them as an order within the church in 1028 at the Council of Troy, but they start in 1090 with the Calabrian monks. They move over to Jerusalem, do their excavating, find whatever they find there to take that back. And in 1099, they kind of sort of officially form the group called the Knights Templar. And so this group is working with the monastic orders within the church until about 1307, when the Knights Templars are disbanded by the French king and the current pope of that time. And it's because they felt that the Knights Templar were too wealthy, too powerful. The French king wanted the money, and they also had concerns that they weren't a Christian organization and that they were committing blasphemy. So all of this sort of went into this mix to destroy the Knights Templar. Previously to that, in 1188, the Inner Order had sort of split away at what they call the cutting of the elm at the the castle of Geyser in Normandy. And that's the Inner Order of adepts that felt that the Templars had lost their way. And this is all important to the Jesuits because they're actually going to be what they call inside the secret societies, the New Templars inside the Catholic Church when they're founded in 1540. And so this group splits away, but the other main group who was more interested in banking and had lost Jerusalem, which is one of the big issues for the splitting of the ways and of them accused of losing their way within the secret societies, they continue on until 1307. In 1307, all of this wealth is an unimaginable amount of money, and not only in France, but also in Spain and also in Portugal and wherever else they had their operations. They were probably the largest corporation of that time. They controlled banking as well as the education. They're the biggest military force, and now they're officially being disbanded in 1307. So what's important that happens here is that the Knights Templars don't just sort of disappear. They just sort of go off in different directions and reform. Some of them moved to Switzerland, where the Hospitallers had set up in about 1180, and they move a lot of the wealth there, which is kind of the beginning of Swiss banking, which again, I know people don't take back that far, but that's also why you have the White Cross of Switzerland and the White Cross of the Knights of St. John, because they're going to help out their brethren order and protect some of that wealth. The other wealth that goes out of the French wealth and leaves France, and the King of France never gets it, stows away with Dumont, who's going to become Grand Master in 1314, and goes over to Scotland under King Bruce, who has been excommunicated from the church at that time, from the Roman Church, for murdering his rival in a Catholic church. And so he gives them protection. And in return, they're going to rush the field at Bannockburn and help them the Scottish win their independence from the King of England at the Battle of Bannockburn. And in return, he's going to set up some of the Freemasons over there with a special order in 1323 called the Rosy Cross. And also, previous to the 1323, have the Sinclairs work as they come out of France, working with the Knights Templar to set up Freemasonry, which is going to be the replacement order for the Knights Templar, only at a lower level, and this Rosy Cross order is going to be the higher order. And this is the same organization that also uses that name that split away in 1188 that some people will refer to as the Priory of Sion, which is kind of the French sort of for that. And but they create what they call the Rosicrucian, or reestablish the Rosicrucian order there. And what happens next is what's really important to the start of the Jesuit order. So they are trying to create a peace with the Catholic Church, but they fail. So at that point in time, what they do is they form a new group that they're going to call the Rosicrucians. And this is in 1317. And they're going to establish a hierarchical order here. And they're going to have it governed by what they call 33 invisible adepts. And then later you're going to have a committee that is going to answer to them. And these are all the pure bloodlines that come out of the Knights Templar. And I know we don't have time to go into all of that, but you've got the descendants of the Merovingian kings that run through here. So this is about the bloodlines that all go back to the Nephilim that we talked just sort of quickly on in the introduction of the show. They set up this organization that is going to be setting up all of these other organizations of secret societies that are going to answer to the Rosicrucians, who are going to answer up to the Committee of 300 after a while, and up to this Council of 33, and then up to the 13 families. And this is that overall sort of hierarchical organizational structure that people need to keep in mind. And they're going to create organizations like Freemasonry, beginning right in about 1313 to about 1316. They're going to create the Rosicrucian group that I've mentioned, the Illuminati group, which actually goes back to more like the 1500s and the 1700s, which become an intermediary group between Freemasonry and the lower level to the Rosicrucians at the higher level. So they're adepts, illuminated. They're going to create the Royal Society between Freemasons and Rosicrucians in 1660. They're going to set up the Rothschilds in the 1700s for the banking arm outside the Catholic Church. And now they're going to think about, how do we reset up the new Templars inside the Catholic Church? And we're going to call them the New Templars. And if you notice some of the things that we talk about in terms of what the Templars did, the Jesuits are going to be a very similar organization. They're going to be a military order. They're going to be in control of banking at a certain point in time. They have a dream of exploration and are on the exploratory end, just as the Templars were part of funding explorations either through Spain or Portugal, both before and after their dissemination. In fact, the Santa Maria flies the Templar flag. And they're both in charge of teaching within the church, which is a big part of the Knights Templar. So this is going to be an organization set up in the Catholic Church to replace the Templars. So before we move on from that, because that's just sort of setting the table, I thought I'd let you in and see whether or not you have anything to add or ask any questions on that, Zen.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the reason, because the guy that went after them, and it was on the October the 13th, that he was bankrupt and was targeting a large amount of their wealth. And so can you talk about the Solomon's treasure or whatever it is that they had dug up that that seems to also be part of the church? I forget the name of the church. The one that St. Clair set up. I don't know why I can't remember.
Chartreuse? Chartreuse?
The one that the priest had found, he had found a portion of treasure and had established, I don't know why, Rosalind.
Rosalind. Oh, right.
Yes.
In Scotland. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I was totally in the wrong country.
Yeah, sorry. And then also, if you would, can you tie this somewhat to a little bit of the exploration? Because, now there's that curse of Oak Island, and that show seems to be connected to the Templars and to St. Clair and all of that. And so if you'll comment on that.
Sure. It's a very, very good question, because I really flew over the Templars in terms of their excavation in Jerusalem. So they had a chance for almost a decade to dig underneath the temple. And they found a lot of things. Hard to verify exactly what all of those things are, but most sort of tend to say they got genealogies, historical documents that they found. They found gold, they found treasures, and they found knowledge. All sorts of ancient knowledge, and specifically building knowledge that they brought back to France with them. And some people say that they even found the Ark of the Covenant. But they found a lot of stuff, and they stowed it away in secrecy at night, and it was funneled to Saint Bernard, who was the second most powerful person in Catholicism when this knowledge was coming back and these documents were coming back. And the Benedictines, what they did was they decoded all of this stuff, and you were putting into use afterwards through the Templars and the Masons some of this knowledge, which created the Gothic architecture that Notre Dame that everybody is familiar with right now that just burnt down. That's the technology that revolutionized building that came back with the Templars. So all sorts of these things came back. And as they were afraid of this knowledge being confiscated by kings and or the Catholic Church, and also some of the priceless treasures, because some of these artifacts would have been thousands of years old, they needed to find hiding places for it. So a lot of that went through the St. Clairs, who changed their name in Scotland to the Sinclairs. It's the same family bloodline of Norse families that are part of William the Conqueror, the Normans. And so they take a lot of this to Scotland. The knowledge and the treasure, not necessarily the money that they're going to earn through banking and other things, which also, sails away on the fleet and also goes to Switzerland, as we talked about earlier. And Sinclair, who has a descendant who is an unwritten name, but in the St. Clair historical records and other records, they have a St. Clair, Henry St. Clair, that is a battle partner of Hugh de Payon, one of the founders of the Knights Templar, and he's part of the founders as part of these royal bloodlines. And they're the ones who are going to start Freemasonry after the fall of the Templars, and they're going to build a shrine called Rosslyn Chapel, which is what they say a miniature model of the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
And then from there, they're going to sail to the New World before Columbus, which is where a lot of people think that Columbus got his information about and why he flew the Templar flag about the continent across the ocean. They actually sailed there and took a lot of their treasures to places like Oak Island and along the Great Lakes and into Massachusetts, and then moved them again, as some of the Knights Templar adepts like to say today, after a period of time, and put them in on certain reservations on native land that they made treaties with. And so they can dig as much as they want in Oak Island. They may find some artifacts, but I don't think they're going to find anything there. So that's kind of this sort of mysterious detective trail of this treasure that came out of Jerusalem and is supposed to have the ability to sort of almost overturn every preconceived idea of what happened in history, and have vast wealth, and include, some people think, the Holy Grail, and some people think the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, there's some very interesting what could be there and other places. Certainly, they spread it out and around, and it seems even Captain Cook, some of his booty might be, connected in some ways to a lot of wealth, and that people that discovered that, there's also legends and rumors they became very wealthy as well with regard to that. But yes, let me turn it back over to you.
I was just going to say an interesting note in terms of ships on the ocean, and I mentioned they had their own fleet that they escaped with. A lot of people believe that this was the start of the pirate ships. And they had a belief in the Templar secret society at the higher level that Jesus didn't die on the cross and married Mary Magdalene and produced children.
Right.
I don't believe that. That's what they believe.
Yeah, neither do I,
And
but-
so people
right.
are familiar with the pirate flag as being the skull and crossbones.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's regarded as being a Templar symbol. And
Right.
what it represents is an ossuary, which people, if they're not familiar with that, is when people died in Judea, they would put them in this sort of rock box and put the bones in there after the flesh had decayed away. And so they would stand the leg bones up, and they would cross within the ossuary and put the head on top, and it would show between those crossed legs. And what they're saying in that symbology, and it's just their allegation, and I don't believe this, I don't want people to misunderstand me on this, is they believe that they have the evidence that shows that Jesus didn't die on the cross. And they'll present that in the end time to try and bring down Christianity and de-deify Jesus.
Right.
And this is the skull and crossbones that is flown on the pirate ship. So a lot of people believe that the pirates were actually ex-Templar navy that were out there pillaging other nations, and particularly if they get anything from the Catholic Church, for putting them out of business. And so all of these things in history have connections that people tend to have overlooked and not understood.
Exactly. Also, if you would, can you comment on the copper scroll? Because that seems to be something that, perhaps they were also looking for with regard to the scattered treasures, and we really don't even know how all that played out in modern times, because even a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls haven't been released to the public.
Yeah, and so this is another historical mystery in terms of treasure that seems to have partnered up at some point and then split away from the Templars, or maybe it didn't split away. There's two different views on that. So my understanding of the copper scroll is that that may be referring to the treasures that Alaric pillaged from Rome when he invaded Rome and took that back to southwest France. Mm-hmm. And again, you have a lot of similar tie-ins to the treasures there that the Templars were said to have brought also back from Jerusalem. Yeah. And again, some of these copper scrolls have locations to significant treasures. Again, a lot, some of the mysteries say that, on this copper scroll had the location of the Ark of the Covenant again. But this was also located in the area where the Templars settled in southwest France, which was the epicenter for revolution and Gnosticism with the Cathars, the Templars, Kabbalistic Jews, Basques, just a whole sort of almost a meeting place, an epicenter for revolution against the Catholic Church.
Yes, and there are other treasure shows and stuff that have come up, like the individual that talked about how the Snake Island and all these different, Templar designs and signs, and even out in the Southwest, there are supposedly remnants of what is called Ogum, which is, these ancient depictions, Templar symbols, and things that were connected to lost treasure. Go ahead.
Well, again, just because the Templars were overthrown in France doesn't mean that they were totally overthrown in Spain or in Portugal. They just morphed into different orders. And so in Portugal, they morphed into the Order of Christ, which is essentially the same words for the Jesuits or for the Knights of Solomon, right? The Templars.
Right.
And so, and all of the assets, as permitted by the Catholic Church at that time in 1317, go over to King Denis. And also in Spain, you have an order which is key to the development of the Jesuit order, you have an order called the Montesa order that's formed in 1317 at the same time that this invisible college order is being formed. And this is an order that is going to control the Templar assets again by papal decree, that they're permitted to do that through the kings that they thought were loyal to the Catholic Church. And in 1534, a fellow is going to befriend themselves with Ignatius and his assembly of the Jesuit order. And this is a fellow by the name of Francis Borgia. And he becomes Grand Master of the Montesa order in 1527, and then becomes the patron for the Jesuit order, that's beginning in about 1534. And this is sort of very much key to understanding that the Templars were still very powerful and in play. And now you can start to see their fingers getting into how the Jesuits were organized.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks for that explanation. I'll let you continue with the story.
So Francis Borgia, just so that people know, he comes out of what they call the black nobility within the Roman Church, which is, again, key part to understanding what's going on with the Jesuit order. And the black nobility is, as we understand them today, are the descendants of popes. And as you peel that onion back a little bit further, you find out that as you go back into history, the black nobility is actually the bloodlines that go back into prehistory, back through the Caesars and back to the Roman gods and back to the Roman Nephilim. And the larger black nobility is this family of European bloodlines, whether or not it's de Bouillon or Anjou or Plantagenet or any of the families. They are called the larger European black nobility. So it's a term that people need to understand who they are, because it has a very important understanding as the society rolls forward. And of course, Borgia is a grandson of the last previous pope who was a Borgia. I think there was 2 or 3 Borgias that were popes throughout the history. And now he is somebody that is patronizing and controlling Templar assets and kind of controlling the Jesuits. Now the Jesuits are going to get an edict to become an order that sets up education in 1538, and then in 1540 they start their series of papal bulls to become the Jesuit order, and they receive the ability to set up education centers and the Roman college, establishing seminaries and teaching all of the priests. So they're getting control of that educational aspect. And I think this is from the influence of what Borgia is implementing on. And Ignatius of Loyola, he is going to die in 1565. And previous to that, Borgia is going to become a member of the Jesuit order in 1551. So now you have the Grand Master, black nobility, controlling the Templar assets, joining the Jesuit order. And then in 1565, Francis Borgia becomes what they call the second and or third founder. But the reason why they say second founder is because there's a Grand Master in between there, because he reinvents what this whole organization is going to do. And so now you have the bloodlines, the secret societies, the Templar wealth, Grand Master in charge of this Jesuit order that is a Gnostic order of priests that are interpreting the Bible through the 7 sacred sciences, as what Freemasonry does. Now, what happens? Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, with regard to, I don't know if you've looked into any of the Tartarean stuff, but there seems to be some weirdness associated with that. And its connection to, the wiping away of the history of the old world and certain aspects of technology. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but if you are, can you comment on that at all? I mean, of course, we don't have to go down a whole, rabbit trail with regard to this, but just wanted to ask your opinion on that. Gary, are you there, brother? Gary, we're not hearing you if you're commenting. Okay, there you go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So the Tartarean history and legacy sort of goes back, to my understanding, to the Scythian
Right.
peoples, who were the ones that believe that they're the ancestors who not only intermarried with the descendants of Japheth in the Bible, but also their patriarchs originally were the escapees out of Tartarus in Scythia.
Uh-huh.
And so these are the dragon sort of bloodlines
Right.
that are going to be moving west with knowledge, treasure, religion, and it sets up over time. This is the eastern, northern, almost into Genghis Khan sort of area, but not necessarily inclusive of the southern Chinese empire. But it becomes over time probably the largest empire the world has ever seen by territory, right?
Right.
And it's a very much an overlooked sort of history,
Yes.
but it's all guided by the same type of groups, which people need to be aware of, because when we get into the end time, you have these 10 kings that are going to be rising to control the world in conjunction with the end time universal religion, and these are from the bloodlines. And so you need to people do need to understand who these dragon bloodlines are that went eastward, as well as into Europe. And we have bloodlines all over the world. So it's one of those important little details. So I haven't done a ton of research or any shows on Tartaria, but it does seem to have a little bit of buzz out there. And I do encourage people to look at that, because for some reason that sort of history is a bit of a dark hole.
Right. And it also seems like these two power groups, you have the Roman Catholic Church and the Western powers, and then in conflict somewhere down the line with these Eastern powers, and their history has been wiped out, and knowledge of them also diluted, so that there's very little remnant with regard to memory or knowledge of these particular peoples and the conflict that took place between these two groups. Or factions of these two groups.
Yeah, and these sort of factions are always kind of rivals, although directionally they're all moving in the same direction.
Right.
They all want power, and they all want to be the most powerful one, right?
Yeah.
And so it's always about power, just like the Basques had a falling out with the bloodlines that moved out of the Middle East to become the kingships of Italy and France and England. So this is always going on, and that's why when we look at the Jesuit order, even though they're in this sort of mix of things, they have their own agenda as well and own objective, and are also power hungry as well. So even though they all directionally work in the same direction for the same end, they all want to be the ones that are controlling things. So they don't always get along, which is, again, why things can appear to be a little bit confusing.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, in 1587, with the Jesuits, and this is going to start to really link some things in before we get into what maybe they're doing in modern times. King Philip II takes over the Montesa order and turns that into a royal bloodline order. To reassert control, which over what's going to happen with the Jesuits, even though they've got their own players now inside the Jesuit order. But what happens at this at about the same time, you have in 1572, Gregory the Eighth grants now the Jesuit order the right to banking and commerce. And now they're going to be like the banking arm within the church that the Templars were. Now, why is that important? Because in 1527, at the time when Borgia is going to become the leader of the Montesa order, you have the King of Spain, who is going over and invading, King Charles V of Spain invading Italy, and causes a collapse of the Roman Church's bank. And they take over and actually put the Pope under their rule, and he becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. And they move that money and banking to guess where? To Switzerland. So now you've got the banking that was set up through the Knights of St. John and the Templars after the fall of the Knights of Templar in 1307, and now the Roman bank is Roman Church's bank is now in Switzerland, and now the Jesuits are going to be in charge of the banking and all commerce for New World exploration. And so they are now doing exactly, for the most part, what the Templars were doing before. And this is how they're going to grow to be extraordinarily powerful. But this organization doesn't last until our time in terms of how we understand it, because in 1773, they've gone rogue with power, and they're trying to control things themselves. And so backed by many of the kings of Europe, King of Spain, King of Portugal, King of France, King of Germany, they are, not Germany, Germany was excluded from that. They are going to force the Pope to disband the Jesuit Society in 1773. And so they kind of totally disappear, although Germany and Russia, in the Greek Orthodox Church in Russia, they're not going to implement this bull by the Pope. And I think just to touch back on Tartaria, when we talk about the Greek Orthodox Church, and you have that split at about 1,000 CE, I think that's part of this Tartaria thing that's going on as well, because that becomes the Eastern Church.
Right.
So you have the Jesuits disbanded. But then in 1814, they're going to be, Pius VII is going to reestablish them again as a knight military order, but and now you're going to get the title of Superior General that goes with that military order. But they're not going to have the same latitude that they had before. They're basically going to be trying to reform and teach teachers to teach, and they're going to do some missionary work. And that sort of becomes what they do for the next 50 years or so. And then they're going to have all of their power reinstated in 1880 by another Pope, Pope Leo VIII. And so now they're going to start their ascent back to power to what we sort of know them as today. But again, what happens is it shows you that they answer up the hierarchy, and the bloodlines and secret societies that are in control of them, they still answer to. But I think the Jesuits go rogue in the end time as well. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself.
Real quick, Gary, before we get to break, I wanted to just get you to comment on the Red Cross and how this is also a part of the deception and a part of how they, utilize what would be a humanitarian group to move arms and to also fund the, because they're always doing arming both sides to profit, off of creating conflict, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, so I mean, the Red Cross is an ancient order and symbol. And it's one that the Templars are going to inherit. And it's going to be actually Saint Bernard who is going to give the Templars the Red Cross. And this is the ancient Rosy Cross Red Order that has a resurgence in the time of Constantine, but actually goes back into the secret societies, back to the building of the Temple of Solomon, the knowledge and the Gnostic orders out of Alexandria. So it's got a deep sort of history. And it's also going to be the Rosy Cross that the Rosicrucians are going to inherit, right? So it has this sort of long legacy of history. And we also see that today with the Red Cross order that, takes the donations for blood and does all of this goodwill all around the world, which are avenues for a lot of different things for them to do as almost as base points to do their work through. So I'm not sure whether or not that's what you were wanting me to get at, but that's whenever you see the Red Cross, you should ask some hard questions about not only the good that they do, but what else they're doing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like another branch, like the Shriners. Everybody believes them to be doing good work, like the Shriners hospitals and things of that nature. But at the top of that pyramid structure, they are utilizing the funds and they are doing a lot of evil things. We just have no idea. And so the front is always to have some kind of humanitarian, idealistic aspect to the organization. Even the United Nations, supposedly created for the benefit of the world in order to handle supposedly the affairs of nations, yet it was a power grab by the elites to control the whole world, global domination.
Oh, absolutely. And, when you talk about the Shriners and they do some great things and, people say, well, what makes them so evil? I mean, they're not even an adept level because they say they're 32nd degree Scottish Rite. Well, that's because they know that people don't understand their symbology and stuff. So these are very, very, very wealthy individuals. These are not young 32nd degree adepts, and I'll touch on what that is in a second. And the Shriners, if you notice, it has that Middle East iconology that links them back to the Middle East, whether or not it's that curved sword and the crescent moon and some of the other Middle East allegories that they have. That goes back to the assassins that they worked with in the Middle East while the Templars were still over there, because they were kind of partners for a while, and who they received their organizational structure of as being a polytheist organization underneath in secret, but on the surface they look like they're a monotheist religion. And the assassins were Sufis, which are mystical Islam, which is polytheist, just as the Gnostics are polytheists within sort of the Christian religions when they call themselves Gnostic Christians, or within the church as in Gnostics with some of these orders that they had. So just some...
Hold on, Gary. Hold on. We're at break. We'll be right back, everyone, for a second hour.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
When the hour strikes for our sovereign Lord of all the world to be crowned, it is these same hands which will sweep away everything that might be a hindrance thereto. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio, and I'm honored to have as guest with me author Gary Wayne, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, we're speaking about the Jesuit connection to the New World Order and to the bloodlines which rule over the world even today. Christ said in his time of the Pharisees that were plotting and conspiring to murder him, that they were the murderers of the prophets from Abel to Zacharias, which of course links them to Cain and to those that had killed the father of John the Baptist, the high priest Zacharias, in the Holy of Holies on what would be Passover. And so, that lets you know right there that the assassination and those things that Gary had been mentioned of, that this is part of their modus of operandi, that they have been utilizing such technique to kill the prophets and also to centralize power, control, and to guide in their manner with the divine right of kings the destiny and fate of humanity. Gary?
They certainly have. And, their MO and the way they've done things is the same now as it was in the past. And so
Right.
if we look to that, it's a lot easier to identify what they're actually doing and how they're preparing to bring about the end time, because they use the same organizational structure, the same strategy, the same techniques, and it's all about the bloodlines and the religion, and it's and power. So
Right.
and I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the end time is essentially brought on by what's going on earth, not that God is going to bring the end time on. It's what is being done on earth and by all of these different groups. All God is doing is using the restrainer to not permit it to happen until the ordained time. But everything else is done by free choice of what's being done on earth today. So this is all important to understand how these organizations are working. And you had mentioned the United Nations, which is one of those key organizations that they absolutely dominate. And, the Knights of St. John, they have permanent residency as a member of the UN, as an honored member, as opposed to a nation, even though they're a nation state, but they're always in coordination with what's going on with the UN, which is kind of the other arm of the Catholic Church today, with the Knights of St. John and the Jesuit orders. Now the Jesuits are controlling both, which is why it's something to really pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it can get very confusing because they use all of these different names and all of these different titles. But as you see in the protocols, they're all working together to bring about this one agenda of global domination so that they can hand it over to their sovereign king, which we know to be the Antichrist. And
exactly.
So can you talk about that as well, Gary?
Well, and the key to bringing about the world government is really about bringing about universal religion first.
Yes.
And that's one of the true roles. I mean, the Jesuits were created not only for the education and get control of that inside the church, not only for the banking and for the commerce, but they were also there to prepare the world for this universal church that they are going to try and make the universal religion, which is going to be an altered form of Christianity, a polytheist Gnostic form that they're going to work from within the church, which is why it's important to understand that this apparition that Ignatius of Loyola had, and several of them with the Mary apparitions, is very much part of how this universal religion is going to come about. And he was chosen by Mary as her personal soldier to create an organization that would rebuild and change and build a new church within the Roman Church, which is the same thing that the current Medjugorje, well, I guess that's not current now, that happened in basically the 90s, but that the initiates that were initiated initiated under Mary and were given a commission to come out with 10 prophecies on specific dates yet to come out to have everybody convert into a one world religion. It's important to understand the Mary thing that's going on in the church, as well as who Ignatius of Loyola was, who was also a Basque, which they believe, not, this is their beliefs and it's their mythos, that they call themselves Homo Atlantis, and that they started the Egyptian civilization, the Scythian civilization that we talked about for Tartaria in the first part of the show, and also the Mesopotamian civilizations after the flood, and they are the most pure line. They had a falling out. That's why you had a Basque diaspora, and that the bloodlines that moved in from Europe, they had a falling out. But this is the universal church that they want to bring to dominate Catholicism first, and then the rest of Christianity, and then the entire world, which is what they would refer to as the New Babylon, which is exactly what they called it in the edicts or the rules set out for the Knights Templar, which were inherited by the Rosicrucians, and it was called the Secret Rule of the Order set down by Master Roncelin. And I mean, you just can't get more in your face than to actually call it the New Babylon. And the Templars had that same dream to set up the New Babylon within the Roman Church, which would be the end time religion. And so all of this is kind of working itself together as we see what Francis is doing. And we also had another interesting cross-section, I'll just throw this in 1968, which has really sort of started to move us forward into the Messianic period, or the fig tree generation, because Jerusalem was taken back by the Israelis in 1967. So you have the Club of Rome being formed in 1968, who's answerable to the Rosicrucians, the upper 50% of the Rosicrucians, who are the purebloods that are from the Committee of 300 and up the ladder, because it's all purebloods from that point higher. And they have decided that they want the world split into 10 groups of nations, spheres of influence, trading blocks, whatever you want to call them, for the new age or the new golden age that Antichrist that they want to present is going to rule over. And at that same period of time, the Jesuits began a complete change and rise back to power and influence when they started to take on liberation theology, which is basically social masonry that was created in the late 1800s between the Rosicrucians and the Fabian Society and other theosophic groups. So you have them now marching towards the same sort of direction, and you have converging with Francis today an acceptance of liberation theology, so socialism, which is going to be the left-wing government of the end time. And you have the acceptance of Francis of these Mary apparitions, and officially accepting a couple of years ago of the first 6 visions of these apparitions of Medjugorje that are going to have these prophets that come out that are going to scare people into converting into this universal religion. So this is the whole thing that the Mary apparition is trying to bring about, and has been working with in conjunction with these secret societies for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Wow, it's amazing how it all ties together with, prophecy and our being the fig tree generation, that we are said to be that those alive that would see the fulfillment of all those things. And certainly it seems that according to current events that everything is accelerated to such degree that we see even an alliance with Russia and Turkey and Persia, as is spoken about in the prophecies of Ezekiel.
Yes.
And so what do you see with regard to, there's speaking as far as the red heifer being born, the third temple, the sacrifices being continued, these kind of things, which are also spoken about in prophecy. And also we talked about how the Dead Sea coming to life again, that is also prophetic fulfillment.
Yeah, I think there's a few things aligning, and if a generation is about 70 years, I mean, it could be more. I mean,
Right.
and Jerusalem is the taking of Jerusalem. You've got or Israel established as a nation in 1947. You got a window 2017 to 2037 for the fig tree generation, trying to figure out what, and not setting dates. And we're not. I'm just throwing out some examples, and also look at the prophecy of 10 jubilees that the Jewish people I know take quite seriously, and that is 10 sets of 50 years, and that ended in 2017, and it began in 1517 with the Turks, ending in 1917. 50 years of no man's land to 1967, another jubilee to 2017, and that says that is when we enter the Messianic period. So again, you see all of these things coming together with what the secret societies are trying to do in the bloodlines to get the New World Order in place. And as I mentioned earlier, as I was going through a lot of the details, when the Jesuits went rogue and then were disbanded in 1773, I think they're going to go rogue in the end time again. But and the reason why I say that is Antichrist is going to ally himself with the 10 kings of the empires to destroy Babylon in Revelation 17 and in Jeremiah 51. And so I think they're going to exert too much control. And I think they're going to sponsor the New World Order, that Antichrist is going to sign that covenant that brings in the last 7 years, and that's going to start his rise to Antichrist, and he's going to be sort of the darling of this new religion that is converting all religions into, I think it's going to be a large umbrella religion that's going to allow different types of worship underneath. But it's going to be a universal religion, and it's going to be in control of the 10 king empire of the end time, because they grow jealous of her. And now if we link back what you were talking in about the protocols of Zion, it actually says that they're going to take a tribute on every transaction that's made in the world. And I think that's going to be controlled by Babylon, who is controlling the end time empire of that point in time. And she's going to grow fabulously rich, just as Babylon is described in Revelations. And that's why they're growing jealous, not only of the power, but of the money. So they're going to eliminate her by the midpoint of the last 7 years. So again, all of these different things from all of these different areas seem to be working almost hand in hand. And the end result, it's the fulfillment of prophecy, at least as I understand it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And this also falls in line with the vision of the last pope, the whole, and how all that unfolds, even with the title or the paragraph, the description associated with Peter the Roman, that there's, it speaks about the destruction of Rome as well as part of all that.
Yeah, it's interesting that in the prophecies of Malachi, they're talking about Peter the Roman, right? So what we do know is the universal church, according to at least Catholic prophecy, is going to be the universal religion, just as the Sibylline prophecies also call Rome Babylon, and just as Babylon in the New Testament, and in Greek, as you take that back, it's also used as a figurative for Rome at that time, and was also used as Pesher language by the Essenes to call Rome Babylon. And again, in the book of Peter, it talks about him being in Babylon, which is a code for Rome as well. So we got a lot of things that are pointing to Rome as being this end time religion, and this is what the Jesuits are trying to bring about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, again, with their particular vision as far as Pike, the 3 World Wars, and even with the establishment of the United Nations and in Israel as part of the whole fig tree generation and that prophecy,
Yep.
it shows to you just how much power and authority they must wield in order for them to actually manifest and to
Oh,
bring that into play.
and if it wasn't for the restrainer, we would already be in the end time. And I just realized I didn't really touch on your question in my rant a couple minutes ago about the last pope and why it's important to understand who Peter the Roman is. And Peter is, is when you take that back to Greek, is the rock, right? Which is the rock
Right.
that Jesus is talking about to build the church on. Peter the Roman in this application is going to be the rock that the new church is being built on, the new Babylon, in how they understand their allegories. And the last pope is on the account of Malachi's prophecy as being the last one. Some people think there might be another one, but he's known as the anti-pope. And the anti-pope is a term throughout Catholic history, is where these powerful orders of royal bloodline orders would depose a pope and set up their own puppet pope that would answer to them so that they could still be in control. And that was known as an anti-pope, and that happened several times. But anti, when you take that back to Greek, it can also mean, this is A-N-T-E-E, and its variations can mean not only opposite, as in antichrist to Christ, and a good pope to an anti-pope. It can also mean replacement pope. And what we have with Pope Francis is he replaced Benedict, which I think only happened once before in terms of, a legitimate sort of replacing. I think it's about 1600. So he is literally what they would call inside the church, inside the Malachi prophecies, an anti-pope. And then back on the Rosicrucian side is, if people, I think people are probably familiar with Nostradamus and
Right.
and his prophecies. While he was a Rosicrucian, surprise, an alchemist, and he did these prophecies in a lot of code that it's very, very hard to understand them, but as best as we can understand those allegories, he predicts the last pope as being the Black Pope. And most people thought that that was going to be somebody, pope from Africa, just because of the term. But for the first time, we have a Jesuit who is now the pope.
Right.
And the leader of the Jesuits is the Black Pope, whereas the Pope out of the Vatican is known as the White Pope, but that's been combined. Now, Francis wasn't, as I understand it, the leader of the Jesuits before, but de facto, he's the leader of the Jesuits, being the Pope. So we actually do have a Black Pope in control today, and now who has replaced the conservative person who was in charge of doctrine before with a Jesuit, so that they can change doctrine without being opposed within the church. And they also replaced Festing over at St. John, so because they were bucking against the Jesuits' power and control. He has absolute control over all of the church and all of the organizations right now, and basically has a free hand to what he's doing. And so you have all of these things coming together that make Francis one of these crossroads types of individuals for the end time, with the timing of the fig tree generation that we were talking about previously. And I don't think he is the false prophet, and I don't believe he's Antichrist, but I do believe he's the anti-pope as Catholics would understand him.
Yeah, it seems all these things are definitely pointing and confirming as witness that we are at the end of days. And so watching how everything unfolds from here is very interesting. And certainly I know that people that understand, as you and I, Gary, that Israel is the blooming of the fig tree, and that Christ specified to the apostles when they asked him specifically what would be the signs of your return and the end of the age, that, to watch for the blooming of the fig tree. And then in the apocalypse of Peter, he specifies that the blooming of the fig tree is the house of Israel. And so to me, it's undeniable, and that that certainly was the harbinger for our generation to really wake up and pay attention.
Yeah, and I think it's clear in allegory in the Bible that the fig tree is the southern empire of Judah, which Jerusalem was the capital of course.
Yes.
And so we also note that in the New Testament that Jesus cursed a fig tree, and
Right.
as a sign of the generation, and that when that fig tree now blooms, that means they're back in their land. So I think all things points towards this being the fig tree generation. It's just a matter of how long is that generation, and when did that clock start counting. But I think Jerusalem is probably one of the keys to that. And we also need, when we look at what Francis is doing as one of the candidates to bring about this universal religion, and I know a lot of people think it's going to be Islam, but I have no idea how Islam becomes a world religion that people accept. Right. I mean, they have to wipe everybody out, way too many people. You only have to wipe out disparaging Christians to the new religion, and the rest of the world will fall in line. But Islam has no tolerance in terms of how they're going about things. So I think they're going to bring Islam underneath this. And that's going to be an interesting trick to do, but I know they've already got that worked out. So, but when we watch what Francis is doing, not only is he institutionalizing the political aspect, as we talked about with social masonry and liberation theology, and institutionalizing the recognition of Medjugorje and those prophets as an extension of the three prophecies of Fatima, and an extension of the third prophecy that they've still kept secret, that he's bringing this sort of front and center, and he's also leaning out to work with other Christian religions to bring them back home to the Roman Church, as they would call it, and also to other religions around the world to try and lay the groundwork. And in the meantime is very, very active in the World Church Organization in assembling. They're not an official member, but they've got representatives that work hand in hand. And the whole idea about that World Council of Churches that are trying to bring everything together is compromise on the doctrine so that they can create a universal religion. And you also see him working closely, Francis, with the UN on so many political aspects, and world government and world peace, and also on the environmental aspects. So again, I don't think he's young enough to get everything done and be false prophet, but I think he's the one who makes the way for the false prophet and prepares the church to be reorganized as a polytheist religion.
Well, it certainly seems, in my opinion, that they would have to bring forth Christianity, Judaism, and Islam as the three big religions under one umbrella, and
Yes.
that if they bring forth this, alien god or fallen angelic deity, the Antichrist, that certainly with signs and wonders, he could be the one to bring forth, and to unite world, and all that is already set in motion and set in play, as you said, with these World Council of and all of that with regard to all the different religions.
Yeah, I think it just takes the right set of circumstances, contrived catastrophes, whether or not it's economic collapse, it's a nuclear bomb going off, it's false prophets going out predicting doom, convert, or the world's going to be destroyed, the language of Babel. I think that's sort of all part of how this thing moves forward more quickly. And I also think the Mary thing has the ability to cross over into Islam, because they venerate Mary quite highly in the Quran. And they also recognize, Jesus as a prophet, even though the Quran would say he's higher than a prophet. The organized Islam doesn't say that. And as long as the secret societies of what we mentioned earlier come through with their plan and evidence to de-deify Jesus down to prophet status by proving with, which will be false evidence, but they say they've got the evidence to say that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Now you start to bring Christianity in a reformalized form back into a position to be part of this universal religion where Jesus is just another prophet. Now, literalists, like you and myself, who take the Bible literally and what it says, aren't going to go for that. But if you understand that they've corrupted most of the churches, even in Protestantism today, with Gnostic molds, then they're using the interpretive approach. They don't have to do a whole bunch to bring down Christianity if they somehow convince people that Jesus died or didn't die on the cross and wasn't resurrected, that he survived to have children. Because as Paul said, our religion stands on that single doctrine. And if he wasn't resurrected and isn't sitting at the right hand of God right now and isn't coming back, then our religion is a lie. So it stands on that. And they're going to attack that hard. Just as many organizations look at Paul as a heretic, he is going to, and all of his gospels are going to be shredded as well, because they believe it was the Pauline gospels that raised Jesus to deity status. So they believe that if you can get rid of that, then that takes away the case for Jesus being, the true Son of God, even though he says he is in the Gospels. And they'll use it, but he always said, for the most part, that he's the Son of Man. And they're also going to bring forward that the Bible, and this is the secret societies and the Gnostics, isn't to be understood as a literal subject. They're going to talk about it in a fairy tale manner where the superficial, what they'll call the superficial narrative on top, isn't the true meaning, but you have to be initiated and illuminated in the mysteries to understand the true meaning of the Bible, that it needs to be interpreted in the allegoric form as they do in their religion. And so when you hear people talking about not taking the Bible literally, that it's not accurate, or that you have to understand it in an allegorical sense, just as they'll say the resurrection is an allegory, and didn't actually happen, that's Gnostic corruption. And that's how they're going to try and bring all of this together, I think.
Right, I agree with you. And the setup has been for very, very long time, just like we were talking about with the Merovingian bloodlines, the whole Dan Brown fable, that Christ didn't die on the cross and that he married Mary Magdalene, that they had children, the Merovingian bloodlines, and that the Antichrist, or who we know to be the Antichrist, but this world ruler, that Savior at the end of days, that he will come of this bloodline. It's been in play for a very long time. Go ahead, Gary.
And they're going to demonstrate that they've been documenting this all the way through history,
right,
but in a way that they wouldn't be persecuted by the Roman Church, right? Because this is the big secret that they hold. Right. And so, beginning, let's say, with the Grail mythos and the Grail literature, all of that is tracking the bloodline, they say, of Jesus and Mary Magdalene through their third son, Josephus, that it marries into the Welsh bloodline and then crosses over to the Merovingian with Aragon, who marries Amenemhat of the Merovingian dynasty, right? And then, of course, de Payan, de Bouillon, and Anjou, some of the members of the founders of the Knights Templar, who were all royal bloodlines and sons of kings from the Lorraine region, and thus the double cross of Lorraine is another allegory for the bloodlines, were descendants of the last survivor, Dagobert, of the Merovingian bloodline. So they're going to document that, as saying we've got literature all the way through. They're going to say that these Gothic temples that we built were dedicated to Mary, but not Mary, Mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and as an allegory for Isis, just as they believe that they dedicated. And I believe they did dedicate those churches to to Mary Magdalene and to Isis. It's their belief system. And they're all decorated with occult images. And they've got Shakespeare, who's documented all of this stuff. They've got the fairy tales. They've got all of this stuff that says it's been there all along, but in a way that we could preserve that history to prove to you without being persecuted by the Roman Church.
Right, right. And that this is the big secret, and the reason for the secrecy with regard to the Knights Templar, and as you said, to keep themselves from being persecuted and to hide it, and metaphorically, allegorically, the whole Sangreal, the Holy Grail, the cup of, all of that.
Well, for them, the Holy Grail is allegory for the bloodline of Mary Magdalene. Yes. And even though the Da Vinci Code was a fiction, it was based on what they believe in.
Exactly. Yes.
A lot of inside information. And the Templars were called the keepers of the secret, right? They were protecting the bloodline and the genealogies that they say they have of this bloodline, and that's the bloodline of all of many of the members, the Anjou, who creates the Plantagenet later on, the de Bouillon and de Payon. They were all part of this bloodline, and that's why the Templars were created. And the inner organization that splits away in 1188, the Priory of Sion. And for people who don't think that organization actually existed, get a hold of me through my contact information on my website. There's an email there. I can send you some historical references that show you that they were around at that time. But anyways, they've been tracking this message and protecting it. And the Knights Templar were the source of the modern secret societies and the Jesuits that we were talking about for the whole show. And when we also talked about King Philip the second, who took over that Montesa order in 1587. He was part of the Order of Golden Fleece as part of the bloodlines that came from a marriage, between the Habsburg-Lorraine family of the Austrian Empire. And notice that name Lorraine, that goes back to the area where Anjou and de Payon and Anjou came from on the French side for the Anjou, as opposed to the Italian side. And he had the King of Jerusalem title. And the current King of Spain had the King of Jerusalem title. And the King of Jerusalem title was first awarded to Baldwin in a small priory on the Rock of Zion in Jerusalem by Calabrian monks, who we mentioned and talked about also earlier as part of these monastic groups, and crowned as the King of Jerusalem because the Knights Templar and the Crusaders had taken Jerusalem, and they felt Jerusalem was their birthright city. And they got that because they also scion into their bloodlines that go back to King Saul, who was a Benjamite. And if people remember in the Exodus, Jerusalem was given to the Benjamites. So that King of Jerusalem title and that double cross of Lorraine is some of that symbology to watch the Western pure bloodlines in terms of who they are, and that they believe Antichrist will accept and be crowned King of Jerusalem in the temple at the abomination. So follow that King of Jerusalem title, just if not for anything else out of curiosity. It'd be interesting to see whether or not that actually comes through, because there are many rivals to families who want to have their people put in as Antichrist. And the people of the Da Vinci Code or the Priory of Sion, that's just a French influence, right? The European influence. But as you said, there's the bloodlines, from the East. There's the bloodlines from China. There's the bloodlines from Japan. They all want to have their family and their posterity, and that will present the official Antichrist. And as Jesus said, there'll be many Antichrists, people coming in his name in the end time. So we also want to be careful not to jump at the first one that we think will look like an Antichrist, because we're probably going to jump too quickly. I do believe he's going to be involved on negotiating the covenant of the last 7 years, as Daniel talks about. But we want to be very, very, very careful. And I also think people are going to get fooled on who Antichrist is because everything in the end time becomes a counterfeit. Just as Satan, I think, creates a counterfeit realm to be like God, everything is to be a counterfeit. So you're
Right.
going to have a counterfeit everything, including an Armageddon, that Antichrist is going to take credit for and come back and offer peace
Yes.
as his credentials for Antichrist. And he's also going to be the one who has a head wound, so he's probably going to counterfeit a resurrection as well. And I think as you were talking about that Gog war, in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is that Revelation 9 war of the 200 million, and the same as the Joel 1 and 2, which will appear like Armageddon.
Right. And then you throw in the whole thing that Werner von Braun had warned us about with the possible fake alien invasion. That could be the whole locust army, and that aspect of the supernaturalness with regard to the whole, as far as the locust army and the return, the giants and all of that. I mean, it's just
it's
bizarre.
It's crazy.
It is.
And I have a lot, some people come in and say, well, you have to take everything as an allegory, because when you look at these beasts in this Gog war and Joel war and Revelation 9 war, I mean, people aren't riding horses and what are these other things? They're either trying to imagine weaponry that's mechanical, like helicopters and things like that, and tanks, or you have to take it as an allegory. And what I kind of come back to is our technology is moving forward so quickly, and we have this alien introduction that's going to be part of the deception of the end time, I believe. But I think they're going to be able to develop through DNA manipulation and cloning and all the other technologies and AI that they could probably form these crazy looking beasts as weapons of war that are biological, just as they created all of these fantastic beasts and beings before the flood, as recorded in the various religions and mythologies around the world. Right. I think it's entirely possible. So I think we don't want to get ahead of what technology is going to be able to do. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what exactly these locusts are, even though that is defined in Hebrew as, just also describing armies as you take that back to the meaning in Hebrew. But I think it's got that literal aspect as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Even Isaiah warns about this in chapter 13 of the Septuagint. So definitely a lot to consider. We've got like 12 minutes remaining, Gary, and so I want to give you a chance, if you would, to give out your website contact information, and also announcing again that Gary will be doing Ask Me Anything shows through us. And so to please, even anything that you've heard here on this broadcast, if you have questions on any of that, to please send in your questions to Joy Garcia at sacredwordpublishing.com. And also you can send them directly to Gary as well, and he'll compile them so that we can, bring all of your inquiries forth and to give you answer as well. Gary, give out all your information again.
Sure. And you can contact me through my website, Genesis6conspiracy.com, Genesis6, the number 6conspiracy.com, and there's an email contact that you can get a hold of me there, or through Facebook under Gary Wayne. If you're a member of my group, contact me there, or message me on Messenger, or get a hold of me through Twitter at GaryWayne63. And if anybody was wanting this sort of step-by-step and a whole bunch more than we're able to get into tonight in terms of the Jesuits, I have a 4-part commentary series on the Jesuits that allows you to walk through all of this historical information. So I can share that with you on Facebook or send it to you with the pictures, or I also have that on a Word document that I can give it to you in PDF form that will also have the Facebook link embedded in it, that you can go look at the pictures, because the pictures are always really interesting in terms of the commentaries that I put up. But it also has my source references there, so you can verify what I'm talking about.
Awesome. Well, that is most excellent information. Um, and again, you said that maybe possibly within the year for your second coming book, and tell people again about the general focus and the the overall theme of that.
Yeah, the overall theme is about the Holy Covenant, the northern and southern tribe, how the northern tribe gets lost into history, what prophecy has to say about Israel and Judah, how to apply those prophecies, roll that forward to the end time in terms of second Exodus, when and how that takes place, and how to apply prophecy in the end time so that you don't get it confused, so that, people a lot of times confuse Israel prophecies with Judah or church prophecies. You need to keep that separate if you're going to understand end time prophecy. But it's really about second Exodus happening, is the big sort of push that I'm going to lay out for people, when and how and who does it in the end time.
Awesome. Okay, well, we've got, again, about 8 minutes remaining, and so I want to give you a chance for final comment and anything else that you'd like to share as far as anything of interest with current events or anything. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, people should know that I did a prophecy conference in Dallas in March with the Hear the Watchers. And they have, if you want to hear my view on prophecy and how that rolls forward and how I go about doing it, I gave a nice 90-minute presentation on that in terms of the literal application and putting everything around what Jesus said. So there's a DVD collection out on that. I'm also starting to put out with Josh Peck. I'm working with him a couple times a month on Disclosed TV, where I'm putting out a half an hour commentary on video on certain subjects. And I put out my first one, and I'll be posting that all around on social media as well. So it'll be readily available if you're not a member of Josh Peck. And it's called The Christian Contrarian, and want to get into all of these kinds of topics similar to what we were talking about today, and just put a light on things and how it connects to prophecy that is too much avoided by churches today. Right.
And there is so much. I mean, the information, just keeping up with current events, it's difficult, And
it is. It's overwhelming.
Yep. Right. It really is. It's overwhelming. And so how many shows have you done with Josh Peck, and where can people go to find those?
On Disclosed TV, and you can also look on my wall. I've got it posted there, or in my group, or on Twitter. So I did my first one last Saturday night. I'll do 2 a month. I'm trying to make sure I can commit to anything that I do, and if it and maybe I'll do more later. But this is how we're starting out.
Sweet, that is awesome. Well, we appreciate all that you do, Gary. You certainly are a most excellent researcher, and you've looked into a lot of things and tied them together to help people to understand the bigger picture and those things that are coming. With regard to current events or news stories, anything of interest, because I know that you do release through your website, Genesis Conspiracy, and also the Facebook group, anything of interest that you'd like to share with regard to any happenings over the past few months or anything of that nature?
Yeah, in terms of what's going on the world picture right now, I think there's still a lot of shuffling that's going on out there. So I don't see anything that's quite major at this point, but it seems to be kind of like tightening a band that's going to spring pretty quick, because everything that's going on is just sort of creating a lot more tension and dissatisfaction. And I think there's going to be a backlash, and we're going to see that prophetic timetable start to move forward, I think, just with how things are just kind of aligning out there. But I have to tell you, though, I just feel that we're a lot more into the birth pangs right now than what we've ever seen before. That in all aspects of things are sort of happening more quickly and in more severe ways. And I see a significant change in how people are carrying themselves. And, I look at, the politics that's going on, and it's so divisive and it's so nasty. And I think all of this gets worse because that's what it takes to drive the worst aspects of what's going to happen in the end time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And definitely we see, the whole controlled opposition, the false left-right paradigm that is utilized to, distract people and keep people caught up in that whole divisiveness and to keep people off the, as far as the mind on their kingdom, prioritizing their eternity through Christ, all of those kind of things.
Well, and I think the scariest thing that's going on right now, as we look at all of that, is, and whether or not you're a Trump fan or not a Trump fan, it's not about that. It's about how powerful the media is, who they're working with, and even after they're proven wrong, they just keep doubling down. It just shows you the power of the propaganda that they're starting to leverage, that it takes to bring about the end time. I think we're seeing that coming, and again, in a sort of a birth pang sort of manner.
Right. Yeah, they can, basically put a witch hunt on anybody and force, if there's not anything there, they'll make up something in order to get people to destroy the messenger and destroy the message, and also ruin reputations, all those kind of things as well. Yeah. So the fake news and disinformation.
Fake news.
Yeah.
And then how that's partnering, and I want to be careful here in terms of the social media oligopolies that are also controlling and putting their foot on the scales as to what can be said and what can't be said, and by whom. Right. It's all sort of coming together into this juggernaut of power that it will deceive the elect at some point, if that were possible.
Right, exactly. Yes, and with regard to, a lot of people have utilized YouTube as a platform for alternative truth and to share that, but now they are cracking down as well, and targeting, even ourselves and others, and channels are being wiped out, and people are being punished for. I mean, they're making up excuses to basically to squelch the truth and squelch voices.
They are, and unless you're on the Christian side or the right side of the scale in terms of politics, you won't notice it. But the damage that they're doing in terms of putting people out of business and censoring people is just unbelievable. I mean, not a couple days go by where I haven't learned about somebody else who has been totally put out of business in terms of working on the internet, and or things being taken down. I know when I talk about the different pantheons now of the occult religions in history, if I'm going to use a mother goddess, and I think I screwed up tonight, so hopefully the show won't be taken down, but there's one that comes out of Egypt that's a female goddess that's associated with a terrorist outfit that they use their algorithms on, and they take down my posts and shows I've been on because that name is mentioned. So they also have a blunt instrument aspect that is also going on out there. So you see all of these things coming together, and it doesn't take a whole bunch to put things over the edge. And I do believe our technology is very quickly getting to the point now where we can actually pull off everything, and even the most bizarre details of Revelation in Isaiah 13 and 14, as you were talking about, which is an interesting end-time prophecy, as well as some tree history and stuff in there that can actually happen. And I love, when you mentioned Isaiah 13, I was just going, you know what? I did probably 7 or 8 commentaries on that, going through Revelation or Isaiah 13 and 14 and connecting that to the end time and prehistory and everything that's going on in there. So kind of warmed my heart for you to bring up Isaiah 13 for me tonight.
Yeah, those are fascinating chapters. Have you ever read them in the Targum, in the ancient Aramaic Targum, as far as...
I have, but only quickly. And the only reason why I can say I read it in the Targum is because you were nice enough to send me your book on the Targum.
Yeah, and it's incredible reading and studies and teaching. And actually, Gary, I've got some other books on the Targum that were not included in those that I'll send you, because reading the alternative, it's just amazing. Like even in the 5 books of the Pentateuch, there's allusion to the word of the Lord, which is specific to Christ, and yet this has been taken out of those 5 books 227 times. And so they're hiding, the connection of Christ and his relationship with the ancient patriarchs, and also, as far as the prophecies connected to him. And, that can't be coincidence or on accidents. I mean, there's an organized effort there.
Oh, no doubt about that. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. All right, brother. Hey, we appreciate you. And Gary will be on with us tomorrow night as well on Truth Frequency Radio. We'll be talking about the ancient wars of the Nephilim and the giants. And so please do join us there. We appreciate you, brother. God bless you.
It's going to be an awesome show tomorrow. Love talking about Og and the giant wars.
Yeah, definitely. Going to be an awesome show for sure. And also for those that have been looking for the shows that Gary and I did on the 100,000 Giant Wars, YouTube has censored and shut those down. And so, but we will be making them available in other places and other avenues. So God bless all. Thank you, Gary.
Thank
Shalom,
you.
brother. Good night, all. Shalom.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.